Good morning. I'm Michelle Sterling for Friends of Science Society. Tulips are really a sign of spring, aren't they? It's a time of rejuvenation, rejoicing. The world is coming back to life. But this spring, tulips are a sign of Tulip-O-Mania for the wind and solar industry. You know, for years we've heard about how wind and solar are free, they're the cheapest source of power generation, they're a fantastic deal, and they'll completely replace fossil fuels. But all these commentators have completely forgotten that wind and solar are made from fossil fuels, and they're made from various types of metals and rare minerals that are now extremely expensive because of the energy crisis worldwide. Oil, natural gas, and coal prices, commodity prices have skyrocketed, as have things like neodymium, the rare earth mineral that's used to make the big magnets in the wind turbine, and things like silica, copper. All these things are now costing a fortune. Some of the prices have escalated by thousands of percent in a very short period of time. So right now, the wind energy industry is basically sucking wind. It's an industry that's relied on very heavy subsidies from government, and it's relied on cheap labor, mostly in China. And it's relied on stable and fairly cheap mineral prices in that part of the world too. But all those parameters are dead now and will be for a long time. So the industry, and some companies are reporting that the industry is actually just selling products, wind turbines, at a loss, simply to keep some cash flow going and keep some people employed. Now, you know, there's never a time to rejoice when people are losing jobs and industries are going under. But sadly, the wind and solar industries are a perfect example of what we call Tulip-O-Mania. And Tulip-O-Mania is based on these speculative bubbles, and it refers to a time in Holland in the 1600s when you actually could buy a tulip bulb and trade it for the price of a house or a ship or silver plate. So what was happening is that tulips had become outrageously popular there. They'd become imported from Turkey, and for some reason people really took a liking to these. Of course, you have to remember that that was a time when people lived very sparse existences. Their houses were very simply furnished, and this tulip appeared to be almost a magical thing. So people started betting on what they call the offsets, meaning the bulbs that come from tulips. So they were just like with the carbon markets. They were actually trading on bulbs that didn't exist yet, and in fact at one point weren't even planted. And they were trading with these ever higher escalating numbers to buy a tulip bulb that at that point was worth the price of a house or a ship. And of course, within a few days of the collapse of the market, was worth nothing. And a lot of people's lives were ruined. Now, many commentators have foreseen this with the wind industry. In fact, it would seem that banks stopped financing wind and solar farms because obviously it was all based on subsidies and the unproven thesis that carbon dioxide drives climate change. So when either of those collapse, so does the whole narrative. And what had happened is a lot of institutional investors who were invested in wind and solar got big oil companies where they were also invested. They got them to invest in wind and solar. And you might say, well, why would they do that if it's such a bad deal? Well, at the time it was a good deal. It was even a great deal. Because wind and solar were heavily subsidized and are heavily subsidized by you, the taxpayer. And also there were many, many different kinds of incentives. And Robert Lyman has written a report called Broken Promises, where he outlines, I think, at least 23 different incentives and subsidies, direct and indirect, that the wind and solar industries get. But, you know, the taxpayer only has so much money. In many parts of the world, subsidies have been cut more and more recently. The renewables industry and the securities markets created a new form of accounting called sustainable accounting, just to prop up this bubble of industry. And why were wind and solar deemed to be so important? Because we know they don't actually generate a lot of power. They're actually fairly poor performers, except in very unique geographic situations. Well, they generate what's called a renewable energy certificate. And these are almost like money. They're like monopoly money, if you like, which big industry and banks can trade internationally. So, you know, if you're a high emitter, you can actually make money buying and selling emissions. And sometimes emissions are even upped to make more money in certain parts of the world. There's a whole booklet on this that Interpol put out a few years ago called A Guide to Carbon Trading Crime. So have a look at that book and question your elected representatives who are now pushing wind and solar like crazy as a solution to climate change. Basically, they're doing a stock promotion. And you should be asking yourself, why are they doing that with your money when wind and solar cannot perform in this kind of market? You can't make affordable wind and solar devices when energy prices are sky high and rare mineral commodities prices are through the roof. So it's sad, but all these Tulip-O-Mania bubbles ultimately burst. And sadly also, the people who suffer are always the little people. That's you and me. For Friends of Science Society, I'm Michelle Sterling. By the way, if you haven't subscribed to our channel, please do so. Please follow us on our social media. And we'd like to also ask you if you could donate, because we're funded by our members. We don't get funded by YouTube subscriptions, but our YouTube subscribers could certainly donate if they'd like to support our work. Thank you.